Henry VIII ascended to the throne in 1509, a moment that marked the beginning of a reign filled with dramatic turns. At this juncture, he also married his first wife, Katherine of Aragon. Initially celebrated as a charismatic and athletic young monarch, Henry VIII was the epitome of an eligible prince in early 16th century Europe. His transformation from a well-liked, handsome ruler to a tyrant notorious for his marriages and their tragic endings is a tale of intrigue and power. Remember the famous mnemonic for his 6 wives' fates: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. This phrase encapsulates the turbulent and often cruel nature of his personal life. But what led this once promising king to such extremes, including the execution of 2 of his wives? Stay tuned as we unravel the complexities of Henry VIII's reign, a story that blends ambition, romance, and betrayal. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating historical insights. Katherine of Aragon's story is a poignant one. She endured not just the loss of her status as queen, but also the sting of public humiliation and rejection by King Henry VIII. But why did Henry treat her with such disregard? To grasp Henry's mindset, we need to consider the context of his era. In Tudor England, the pressure to produce a male heir was immense. This was not just a personal desire, but a political necessity. Henry and Catherine's marriage yielded one daughter, the future Queen Mary I, but their other children were lost to miscarriages or stillbirths. For a king, the failure to secure a male successor wasn't just a private sorrow. It was a public crisis, impacting the royal image and succession. Henry's response to this perceived failure reveals much about his character. His ego bruised, he became obsessed with proving his masculinity. He commissioned portraits that exaggerated his physical attributes, perhaps as a way to counteract any whispers of inadequacy. These images showcased a heightened masculinity, with a particular emphasis on his private regions. King Henry VIII, known for his athletic prowess in sports like hunting, jousting, and tennis, was keen on presenting himself as a strong and virile leader. This image was crucial to his identity, making it easier for him to blame Catherine for their lack of a male heir, rather than confront any personal shortcomings. Yet, the pivotal twist in Henry's marital saga wasn't just about his ego or the lack of a son. It involved the alluring Anne Boleyn, a woman whose influence reshaped history. Anne, possibly aware of the king's insecurities, played a masterful game. Some suggest her motivation stemmed from family ambitions, but her methods were undeniably effective. Anne's strategy was subtle yet powerful. She appealed to Henry's vanity while maintaining an air of unattainability. Her refusal of his gifts and advances wasn't just a display of modesty, it was a high-stakes play of hard to get. This approach not only maintained Henry's interest, but escalated it to near obsession, transforming the king's infatuation into something akin to worship. The enchanting melody of Greensleeves, often rumoured to have been composed by King Henry VIII for Anne Boleyn, remained shrouded in mystery. The lyrics "cast me off discourteously" are thought to echo Anne's initial rejection of Henry's advances. While this connection tantalises historians and music lovers alike, it's important to note that this is mere speculation. The true origin of this classic tune is still unknown. Once Anne Boleyn stepped into the royal spotlight, Queen Catherine's fate was sealed. Anne promised Henry the son and heir he so desperately sought, but her conditions were non-negotiable. She would only bear his child as his wife and queen. Anne's refusal to share his bed until Catherine was out of the picture added fuel to Henry's already blazing desire. Driven by his passion for Anne and his yearning for a male heir, Henry embarked on a radical path. When the Pope denied him a divorce, Henry didn't just step over the obstacle, he demolished it. He established the Church of England, decisively cutting ties with the Roman Catholic Church. This bold move not only fulfilled his personal desires, but also ignited a religious divide within England, setting the stage for a long-standing conflict between Catholics and Protestants. After Anne Boleyn married Henry VIII, the dynamics of their relationship shifted dramatically. The once powerful leverage she held over the king began to diminish. With her coveted title secured, Anne's influence started to wane, particularly under the immense pressure to provide a male heir. Remember, Henry had reshaped an entire nation's religious landscape just to marry her. When Anne gave birth, it was to a girl, the future Queen Elizabeth I. Although a significant figure in history, Elizabeth's birth was a bitter disappointment for Henry, who craved a son. This event marked the beginning of Anne's decline in the royal court. Subsequent miscarriages only deepened her vulnerability, diminishing her standing with the king. In this precarious situation, one can only imagine the stress Anne must have felt, especially given the fate of her predecessor, Catherine. Speculation arises that Henry may have harboured resentment towards Anne. After all, their union had led to monumental changes, including England's split from Rome. As Anne Boleyn failed to provide Henry VIII with a male heir, it dealt yet another blow to the king's already bruised image. With age creeping up on him, Henry's impatience and desperation for a son grew. Meanwhile, his attention began to wander towards Jane Seymour, signalling the crumbling foundation of his relationship with Anne. The final blow to Anne's standing came with a barrage of scandalous accusations. She was charged with adultery, involving multiple men, shockingly including her own brother. Many of Anne Boleyn's modern-day supporters argue these charges were concocted to remove her from power, clearing the way for Henry to start anew with Jane Seymour. The evidence against Anne, they contend, seems suspiciously weak. Innocuous actions like dancing with her brother were twisted into incriminating testimony. At the time, however, no one dared defend Anne amidst the swirling accusations. She had garnered considerable resentment for her role in the mistreatment of Catherine of Aragon, which only fueled the fire against her. Despite having alibis for 12 of the instances where she was accused of adultery, Anne Boleyn's fate seemed sealed. Though not formally charged with witchcraft, rumours swirled that she had bewitched Henry into marrying her. Trapped in a dire situation, Anne's once formidable influence over the king had completely evaporated. In May 1536, after just 3 years of marriage, Anne faced execution. In what can be seen as a bizarrely tender final act, Henry ordered a skilled French swordsman for a quick and painless beheading. This act made Anne Boleyn the first English queen to be executed, marking a grim milestone in history. How could Henry, once so passionately in love with Anne, reach a point where he sanctioned her execution? Beyond the complex web of political and personal factors, there's another intriguing theory: a possible medical explanation for Henry's drastic shifts in behaviour and decision-making. The drastic transformation of Henry VIII's personality is often attributed to a severe jousting accident that occurred at Greenwich Palace on January 24, 1536, a critical juncture not long before Anne Boleyn's execution. In this harrowing incident, his horse collapsed on him, rendering him unconscious for 2 excruciating hours. This accident is speculated to have caused a significant personality shift in Henry, morphing him from a sporty and generous ruler to a cruel and tyrannical one. The History Channel documentary, Inside the Body of Henry VIII, suggests that this accident may have resulted in undetected brain damage, potentially explaining the stark change in his demeanour. Could it be that brain damage influenced Henry's decision to execute his second wife? If we could transport today's medical expertise and technology back in time, we might be able to unravel this mystery. In a rapid sequence of events, just over a week following Anne's beheading, Henry married Jane Seymour, his mistress. What thoughts must have crossed Jane Seymour's mind, stepping into the role of queen after witnessing the fate of her predecessor? It's reasonable to imagine a mix of fear and caution. Fortunately for Jane, she succeeded in giving birth to a son, the future King Edward VI, fulfilling Henry's long-sought desire for a male heir. Tragically, Jane passed away from postnatal complications shortly after childbirth. She is often regarded as Henry's favourite wife, perhaps partly because she never lived long enough for Henry's affection to wane, and of course, for delivering him the coveted son. Ironically, unknown to Henry, Edward's reign would be short-lived, ending not long after his father's. As Henry searched for another wife, Christina of Denmark famously rebuffed him, reportedly quipping that she would gladly offer one of her heads to Henry if she had two. The quest for wife number 4 turned into something resembling a Tudor-era online dating mishap. Henry had been enticed by a portrait of Anne of Cleves, but upon meeting her in person, he felt deceived. The king did not mince words about his disappointment, harshly critiquing her appearance, and even going so far as to liken her to a horse. Under political pressure to maintain an alliance with the Germans, Henry VIII found himself compelled to marry Anne of Cleves, despite his personal reservations. Their wedding night was, predictably, far from successful. Henry's blunt assessment was, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." The marriage was swiftly annulled on the grounds of non-consummation, a fortunate turn of events for Anne. In a twist of fate, Anne of Cleves arguably emerged as the most fortunate of Henry's wives. She was bestowed the title of the king's beloved sister and received a lavish settlement, including Richmond Palace and Hever Castle, the ancestral home of the Boleyns. Wisely, Anne did not contest this arrangement, willingly giving up her queenly status. Given Henry's track record with his previous wives, her decision seemed not just prudent, but necessary for survival. Next in the tragic procession of Henry's wives was Katherine Howard, his fifth. By this time, Henry, at 50, was plagued by a painful ulcerated leg wound and had gained considerable weight. The transformation of Henry VIII from a charming young king to a far less appealing figure in his later years was stark. Katherine Howard, whose exact birth date remains unknown, was only in her early teens when she married the much older king, a pairing that would be considered deeply problematic by today's standards. Despite the significant age gap, Katherine managed to entertain the king. He was utterly smitten with her, affectionately dubbing her his rose without a thorn and showering her with extravagant gifts. However, Katherine engaged in secret affairs and liaisons, a behaviour perhaps understandable given her youth and the stark contrast to her elderly, ailing husband. Katherine's flirtations, though seemingly natural for someone her age, proved to be a catastrophic error. As whispers of her infidelities began to spread, suspicion around her grew. Initially, Henry refused to believe the accusations. He saw Katherine as innocent and was reluctant to accept any suggestion to the contrary. As the evidence of Katherine Howard's infidelity mounted, denial became impossible. Henry, once heartbroken, turned to fury. In a dramatic and tragic scene in 1541, Katherine reportedly broke free from her guards, screaming and running down the corridor towards the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court Palace, pleading for mercy in a moment of utter desperation. Legend has it that this corridor is now haunted, with some claiming to hear echoes of Katherine's desperate pleas. Unlike her cousin Anne Boleyn, Katherine Howard did not receive the relatively merciful fate of a swift execution by a master swordsman. Instead, she faced the axe, a stark reminder of the perilous nature of being queen in Henry VIII's court. Henry's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, managed to outlive the king, but her tenure was not without its own perils. Rumours circulated about her interest in banned religious texts, a dangerous pursuit in Henry's England. Katherine's survival strategy hinged on playing to Henry's ego. She adopted a self-deprecating approach, emphasising her womanly imperfections and expressing a desire for Henry's guidance and wisdom. At this point in his life, his health was deteriorating, and he probably also felt fed up and tired with the idea of re-entering the dating scene. What do you think of this story? Which one of King Henry VIII's wives do you think had the worst experience?